Have you ever just looked around and felt like the world is spinning out of control? You know, that feeling that the old rules just don't seem to apply anymore. Well, today, we're going to dive into an essay by Yoon Hai Rak that hits on that exact feeling. His argument is that to figure out our chaotic present, we need to look back, but not to some great victory. No, we need to look at a moment of profound defeat. So let's get into it.
So the author kicks things off by describing this creeping sense of anxiety. He feels like we're all walking into a really volatile new world order, and the future is getting harder and harder to predict. And to really capture this feeling, he uses two very specific and very powerful Korean words.
And these two terms, they're really the key to understanding his entire argument, Asura Pan and Asura. Now, they both mean chaos, basically, but they describe it in slightly different ways. Let's break them down. Okay, first up, we have Asari Pan. Picture this, a situation with absolutely no rules, a total free-for-all, where everyone is just scrambling to grab whatever they can for themselves. It's that state of lawless, disorderly pandemonium. That's an Asari Pan. Then there's Asura. This word actually comes from mythology, from the god of battle Asura, who had 3 faces and 6 arms and was just constantly fighting. So an Asura is a scene of complete and utter mayhem, right? A battlefield of total confusion. And according to the author, this is the direction he's worried our world is headed.
But to really get why he thinks this chaos is so dangerous, we have to understand his perspective on South Korea's incredible story. He frames it as a genuine narrative of victory, completely against the odds. In the author's telling of history, South Korea wasn't just some side player in the Cold War. It was right at the center of the action. From surviving the Korean War with UN help to the lightning-fast development led by people he calls hidden heroes, he sees the nation's path building toward the 1988 Seoul Olympics. For him, that was the moment that really showcased the triumph of its system, and he argues it even helped lead to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War.
And here's the point that he really wants to drive home. He emphasizes that South Korea is the only nation in the post-World War II era to go from a colony to a fully developed country, all while still being a divided nation. This, he says, is a truly unique and incredibly hard-won achievement.
So, with all that incredible history as the backdrop, we get to the heart of his concern. He believes this amazing 80-year legacy of progress and sacrifice is now in serious jeopardy, and the threat isn't coming from the outside, it's coming from within. This slide just lays his perspective out so clearly. He's drawing this sharp contrast between a past that he sees as defined by national unity and selfless sacrifice, and a present that he describes as totally fractured by infighting. He sees factions driven either by greed or by this uncompromising demand for perfection that just leads to paralysis and chaos.
And believe me, the author does not mince words. He uses this incredibly powerful metaphor, describing the current political climate as a destructive shamanistic ritual. He's saying it's actively turning the country into that lawless Asura Pan and that chaotic Ostrojang that we just talked about.
Okay, so from his point of view, the situation looks pretty dire. But this is where his whole argument takes a really fascinating turn. The author suggests the answer isn't in celebrating those past victories. No. The answer is in studying a moment of near-total defeat. He takes us all the way back to the winter of 1951. After this huge advance to the Chinese border, UN and South Korean forces were suddenly hit by a massive Chinese counterattack. They were forced into a desperate, freezing retreat, and this feeling of just gloomy defeat was everywhere. The entire war effort honestly seemed like it was on the brink of collapse. And this brings us to the central question of his whole essay. In the face of annihilation, with everything completely falling apart, how on earth did these forces manage to avoid a total rout? How did they pull off an orderly retreat instead of just dissolving into chaos? And that right there, that's the core of his whole argument. He's saying that, sure, the glory of winning is great, but the hard-earned wisdom you get from a well-managed defeat, that's infinitely more valuable, especially when you're in a crisis. So how'd they do it? Well, the author breaks it down into 3 parts. First, sound judgment. You had commanders who stayed calm under unbelievable pressure. Second, disciplined action. Soldiers who followed their orders even when it meant sacrificing themselves to hold the line. And third, and this is so important, their orderly retreat wasn't them giving up. It was a strategic move that saved their forces and actually created the foundation for a powerful counterattack later on.
So you have to ask, right? How can a military lesson from more than 70 years ago possibly apply to the really complex social and political problems we're facing today? The author's big idea is that this principle of an orderly retreat is a timeless strategy. It's not about giving up, not at all. It's about having the wisdom to recognize when a head-on charge just isn't working. It's about making a disciplined, strategic move to regroup, consolidate, and create a brand new opportunity for a future advance. It's about finding order in the middle of chaos.
And to back this up, he brings in the master strategist himself, Sun Tzu. He uses this quote from The Art of War as a warning against the foolishness of just blindly pushing forward when the conditions aren't right. True wisdom, he's implying, is in knowing when to advance and, just as importantly, when to execute a strategic withdrawal. And that's where the author leaves us, with this final, really thought-provoking question. In a world that feels like it's turning into an Asurpan or an Asura Jang, is it possible that the most courageous and strategic move isn't to charge forward, but to learn the forgotten art of an orderly retreat? Something to think about.